Okay, so in this session, I'm going to explain about interface. So interface, before this interface, we have understood the inheritance, how we can extend the classes. Then we understood the abstract class, where we will creating the few methods as a abstract and let them implement in child classes to use them. Interface is little bit kind of, it has more contracts if I compare with abstract class. So abstract class has contract like abstract class create uh, one or more abstract methods, and the classes that extends abstract class they need to implement here. In the case of interface, it is a prototype of class. It is kind of a class, so you will simply say public interface and interface name rather than saying public class name. So it is just a type of prototype of class. Okay, so it what it contains? It contains only constants and method declaration. When I say method declaration, it is all the methods what we declare, those are abstract methods over there, and whatever variables we create, those are constant. So interface, whatever methods it has, it will be public methods, it will be public, it will be abstract. Okay, and variables are implicit, public, static, final. So any variable which is been declared defined in interface, those will be final. Static means it will be available at the class level whenever your interface will be loaded, and it is public so that it is accessible outside of that interface. Then we will see about how interface will be implemented. So any class can implement the interface. So it will give you kind of a multiple inheritance, because Java doesn't provide multiple inheritance concept. So once there may be situation that you are trying to you have one class which is standing a abstract class which has few methods which are unimplemented, that child class has to implement. So along with extending the abstract class, you may need to implement few more methods. Okay, so that way you can extend and implement into a class. So you can suppose your class has something called x, so and y is a interface and z is a abstract class. So you can say that x extends j and implements y. Okay, so that way you can do the multiple inheritance. So a class extends one class. Okay, so a class can extend one class, but it can implement more than one interfaces. An interface can extend multiple interface. So there may be a situation where you need to create multiple interfaces. So this is way interfaces among themselves they can communicate. So one interface can extend other interface. Interface references to child class object. So if you have remembered, in case of inheritance, I was creating the object of child classes and referencing them to parent class. So in the case of interface also it is similar things. You are creating the object of child class and referencing to the interface, and we will see if you can create the instance of the interface. Okay, so let's see how we can do a working example of interface in Java. So interface, as I said, it gives you a kind of multiple inheritance flexibility in Java, and it is more on contract. So if I create one interface, so any class they need to implement that interface. So once they implement the interface, they have to implement all the methods which are declared in the interface. So let's create one class called my interface. So let's mark it as a interface. Okay, so this is the way you can create the interface. It is simply like a prototype of class. Only difference is that instead of class you are marking as a interface. Okay, public you are giving because you want to give the same name as the Java class name, Java file name. You have given the my interface, that's reason you have to mark as a public. You can create other interfaces also here. Interface, say ix. Okay, but this is not a public interface. This is very much similar to the class. Only difference is that you are using interface keyword instead of class keyword. Okay, so interface has two things. One is variables, like every class has variables and methods, and class has static blocks also, and some, that is a block of statements that can be used when class is loaded. So in case of interface, it has two things. One is variable and methods. Like class can have inner classes, so interface also can have inner interface or inner classes. Okay, so that much detail I am not going here. Okay, so in case of variables, all the variables are constant. All the variables are constants and they are public, static and final. So we have already understood public, that is about accessibility, static about loading context, and final variable means the value of that variable will be final if it is primitive, or the value of reference, the reference of that object will be final if that data type is object. So if you mark as a int x is equal to 10, so just say int x for now. So it will ask you that because it is a final, you have to initialize it, and no need to give public and static and final because it is understood. Even if you give it final, public, static, it doesn't matter. So the by default it is like that. So it is your choice, you want to give or you don't want to give, but it's better to not to give because you understand the capability of interface. Every variable is public, static and final by default. So whenever you are declaring one object, sorry, a variable, you have to define it. Okay, next you have methods. So I will say I will create one method void, that is return type, and say print x. Here the accessibility I have not given public, private or protected because all the methods are by default public. Here you cannot try anything else. You cannot give private, you cannot give protected, Okay, only thing you can give as public, because it is by default, that is not even required to provide. And it is static also. So sorry, it is abstract. It is not static, it is abstract. It is by default abstract. So even no need to provide the abstract also. So it is always public and abstract. By default. Okay, so you can say print x, you can give print y, print z. Let's have three methods. Okay, it can have class also, say interface inner class, that is by default public. Let's try to put private. It is not possible, but in the class it is possible. Interface, you have to, it is, all the things are public. So you can in fact you can provide interface also, say interface inner interface. Okay, so in that you can say int y, you have to give some values and say void print inner x. Okay, so the bottom line is that in interface mainly you have variables. So those variables are always constant. It means that those are public, static and final. And in terms of methods, all the methods are public and abstract. So any class, they need to, when they are trying to implement this interface, they have to define all the unimplemented methods. So in this interface, all methods are unimplemented, those are abstract. And along with that, you can have, generally this is not a good practice to have inner classes and inner interfaces inside the interface. That is not a practice. You may need to create separate interface if it is not related, or you can create a separate class. But technically it is feasible. That's what I tried to show it here, that interface has inner class as well and interface has inner interface as well. Okay, so let's try to test it. So for that I need to create one test interface. I need to create one class, and that class will implement my interface. Okay, so as soon as you say that your class test interface implements my interface, implements is the keyword which is required to implement the existing interfaces. So you need to implement unimplemented method. So that is print x, print y and print z. Okay, let's try to say x say y, and here is a z. Okay, So these three methods you have implemented here. Okay, let's create one main method to test it. Okay, so in main method, because I have implemented here, let's see what is the value of I, because I is sorry, it is x. Okay, so let's print the value of x here. So you can see that the value of x is 10. X is available here because it is public. And let's try to change the value of say 23. That is not possible because x is marked as a final, so you cannot change the value of the final variable. Okay, so we have understood how to call the variables. Let's try to see how we can use the methods. So here, because this is the a class which you are implementing, so now your class is available at this level. So it is just pretty much simple to create just object of test interface and use it whatever you want. Print text, or let's create with the object. Okay, so interface 1 dot print x, interface 1 dot print y, and interface 1 dot print z. If you run this, you are printing the variable value and x, y, z, which are the output of those methods. So here you have seen that whenever a class implements an interface, it needs to implement all the methods which are declared in the interface. Now what happens if I don't do that? So it has two options. One is, yes, you need to define, you need to implement, you need to override those methods. Another way that you mark this class as a abstract, means you are delegating that kind of job to your child class. So here if I say class x, which extends test interface, okay, so we need to create another class. We will say test. Here we are trying to implement extend this test interface, so class will be test interface. So this class will extend test interface. So the class which is extending the test interface, they need to implement that method finally. So print y has to be implemented by some class down the line in hierarchy. Okay. Now because it is abstract class, you cannot create the object like this. So how you can create the object? As I said, you need to implement the unimplemented methods. So here also you can do it. Print y, it is inner. Okay, so if once you execute it, you will executing x and y, inner and z. So you might have seen that here it is kind of pretty much mixed concept of inheritance, abstract and interface. So those who work in your programming, those work very closely, very much relating to one to another. So that's how your interface will be working. Okay. So if any other class is implementing this interface, they need to implement those methods which are not implemented, which are just defined in parent class, parent interface. So let's try to create multiple interfaces. So one is test my interface. So let's create another interface here. Let's create, say, interface, say X. Okay, let's create another interface Y. Okay, so one interface can extends other interfaces. Okay, so here you might have seen something different here. In case of class, you cannot do the multiple inheritance, but in case of interface, you can do the multiple inheritance. So interface, my interface stands from y and x. So if I say here method void print ix, then I say void print iy. These two methods, if I say here, it means that whenever I'm implementing my interface. So if, for example, here, let's remove this one. So it will be your let's remove this abstract class. Okay, so print y, so if you see here print y, I need to define here. So I will say print y, that is the unimplemented method of interface, that is my interface. But my interface is extending other interfaces, so I need to define the print ix and print iy also. So that's the reason you will see here it is giving to override print ix and iy also. So let's do that. Say sysout iy ix. Okay, so now because we have already implemented, so this inner implementation is not needed. So you can call interface one dot print ix and iy. So you can implement, you can call all the methods here 10 x y z ix and iy. So bottom line, what we can see here, interface can extend multiple interfaces. Okay, same time, and class can implement multiple interfaces. So the interface name was, it is my interface, it is interface and interface y. Because it is in different package, it is not available for this test interface. Okay, so what we can do, we can create a interface here itself. Okay, so this interface I can implement here. Okay, so if I give some method void print interface x, this is the method. So because I am implementing here, so I need to implement the method also. So the method is here. I will say sysout okay. Now if you run it, you can call interface one dot print interface x. So now if you see the result of last one as a interface x as well. So this is how you can implement, you can write interfaces in Java. So what is the scenario when should you use interface? Interface should be used when you have a set of methods which are pretty much common and which are having very high level of contract. So all the classes has to follow the same contracts. So this is like set of rules, you are specifying set of rules that you can put into a interface, and so any class that implements interface, they have to define those rules in their own way. Okay, so any interface, any class can extend, sorry, any class can extend one class but can implement multiple interfaces. So in terms of interface can extend from multiple other interfaces. Okay, so this is what you have seen the difference in the case of class there is no multiple inheritance, but in case of interface there is multiple inheritance. Okay, let's try to recap it. So interface is kind of a class. It has only constant and method declaration. All the methods are by default public and abstract. Variables are implicit by default, public, static and final. We have seen how interface will be implemented in the child classes. If child class doesn't implement all the methods of the interface, then child class has to be marked as abstract. Okay, so a class extends one class but can implement multiple interface. A interface can extend from multiple interfaces. Interface, an interface can extend multiple interfaces. So interface reference to child class object, that's what we have to see, and we have to see the instance of the interface. Let's go to Eclipse. So in your test, suppose you are creating the, here you are creating the test interface, that is the class, and creating the object of class. So this one you can give like this: my interface is equal to new test interface. So you are giving you are creating the object of class, child class, and giving that reference to parent type, that is interface type. This is the same thing you can do as replace to all interface 1 to my interface. That should work as it is, because you are creating the object of that child class. Only thing, you are passing the reference to the parent class, parent interface here. Because here it is from, this method is from other interface. That interface is which one? X. So what we can do here, X, that is the interface, is equal to new and here you can say that x dot print interface X. So if you run, there is no difference in the execution. So this is the way you will generally see the programming, where you are creating the object of your child class and passing the reference to your parent type. Okay, so this is how we can create the instance of the interface, by creating the object of your child class and then passing them back to interface. Okay, that's all about interface. So in the next session we will talk about differences between abstract class and interface, which is very common questions asked in interviews.